Cheers. Rock and roll. Rock and roll forever. What I'm getting at. I'm going to let what comes out of my mouth be inspired by what you guys paint. Not literally. It's more of a circular.
Yeah, like a happening.
Unless you actually put it in. Then I'll do it.
Well.
Only if it's on there. And if you feel it. Okay, so if you need to set the scene a little bit, you can do that. But the idea is to get inspiration from what people are offering. So we're gonna start with visualization. We're gonna pass it forward. And Garrett's gonna start writing it down. Once he starts writing it down, you can then you can start.
So there's a go.
There's a go.
Wonderful. Well, that's fine. Yeah.
Well, you
Yeah.
no rules. Because I already know.
Because I actually sketched it.
Yeah, you know.
How you doing? Pretty good.
Ron is sitting here. But this says Kasiah Sword, but I think in fact it would be an honor position.
They're crawling up and down the stairs. Well,
Okay. You're saying welcome, then I'm starting, then
Okay.
you're starting the mic on.
Okay.
I already turned it on.
hello everybody, and I would like to welcome you to a very special evening. And the thing I can tell you about it is that it's going to be organic. and the organic will start with Seth, and then bounce around a little bit. So be ready for anything. Seth Kinzie.
Does anybody need a piece of paper? Yes. Okay. So, we're going to, today's the International Day of Peace. So, happy International Day of Peace. And we're going to talk about my little peace journey I've been on for the last year, sponsored by Rotary in Uganda and Malawi and Somalia and Ethiopia. And I'm not just going to talk about the event, but we're also going to share a little bit of some of our images of peace that we get as an example of the model that I did in these peace mapping workshops to understand how peace is practiced in different cultures, particularly in Africa. And from these images that we get, that you guys will share with all of us, we'll have some live painting by two incredible painters, brave and bold and talented. And thank you guys for being here. Joan Gilbert and Kasiah Sword. So normally what we're doing in the span of a very short amount of time, and I'll also talk about my trip, takes place over 3 days. So this is quite the time crunch we're doing here. Nonetheless, we're sort of mapping what peace is like in our Wallowa community. So I'm really interested to see how it goes. So let's take a moment. Take a breath. Feel some peace. Let peace come to you. Take a moment. Let peace come to you. Welcome, Josh. And we want to, as we start feeling peace, come to us. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Peace can be kind of elusive. Start feeling the and seeing, you can close your eyes if you want to, the images, the concepts, the ideas, the animals, maybe it's a person that comes to you when you think about your own peaceful image. When you think about peace in your life, or when you think about what makes you peaceful. It might also be a practice that you do that has brought peace to your life. And this will be very brief, but when you feel inspired with that one word that comes to you, maybe 2 words, no more, because we're going to write them down. Write it on that piece of paper. And don't feel like it has to be anything in particular. Just whatever the word is fine. Okay, we're going to have, as this word comes to you, it could be now, it could be in like 5 minutes. Rich and Judy are going to come and take the words from you. So if you guys want to walk through the aisles and just take them, you can pass them down the aisle if you're done.
I'm the usher. Yes. The usher. The collector.
And now we have...
Does anyone need paper?
Ah, good.
We need more paper. Oh.
Nice.
I didn't write one.
Oh, yeah, just add to it. So this is part 1 of this evening. These words will be written down as we sort of begin part 2, and there might be a part 3.
Mandela.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. That's the prologue. Rich, I will now say you can come up and introduce Rotary and the Day of Peace for us. Yeah.
Here you go.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm a member of the Rotary Club of Wallowa County, and Stacy Green is our president. She's right here. do we want, let's see, I think the important thing tonight is that Rotary has for a very long time given fellowships to Americans to study abroad and for other people in other countries where Rotary exists to study in other countries. The Rotary fellowships are older than the Fulbright scholarships. Most famously, Bill Moyers was a Rotary fellow. Okay. And about, Seth, would you say 4 or 5 years ago, that Rotary tilted and decided that what was important in the world was conflict resolution, peacemaking. So Rotary turned its energy, its international energy, towards peace facilities. They found 6 or 8 universities in the world that had conflict resolution programs and started soliciting applications for people to be peace fellows. Seth Kinzie has been living in Malawi County. I forgot to ask him, but it's 6 or 8 years for sure. 10 years? My God, time flies. Anyway, and Seth Kinzie keeps us afloat at the Josephi Center technologically, but that's another side of it. And you'll hear more of that later too, probably. But anyway, Seth put in an application sponsored by the Malawi County Rotary Club. That application went up to a district level, and he was competing basically nationally. And he's the only Peace Fellow this year from Oregon. Okay? And he will tell us about his group, but I think there were, 3 Americans in your group out of 21? The rest from people all over the world in Uganda. So he has had quite a year, and he's here to share that year with us tonight. So, do I need to say anything more, Seth? No? So, welcome back your Oregon Rotary Peace Fellow, Seth Kinzie.
Okay, thanks. Thank you all for coming. It's been a wild ride and a really special year. And I feel particularly lucky that during this wild pandemic experience we've all had, I was still fortunate enough to go twice, and I'll actually go again in 3 weeks to finish the project and try to keep going out there. So we're going to pivot a little bit between our community experience of peace as we get these words put on here. You can focus on what I'm talking, or you don't have to. You can just look at these words and see what ideas come to your mind. I'm totally open to that. So I come from my background, just a little bit on why I was interested in this fellowship is I come from a family of peacemakers. My mother is a theologian and a pastor, and she's got her PhD in South Africa. She studied for a bit on the feminist interpretations of conflict transformation with regards to apartheid out there and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Her friend in college was Naomi Tutu, who is the daughter of Desmond Tutu, and that blossomed into some great relationships through the years. They're also involved in the sanctuary movement. And my father, on the other side of so that's the peace side, and the music side, is a great musician and a great banjo player and quite the poet. And he brings peace words into his poetry quite a bit. So I was sort of shaped by this, interest in peace, and just always wanted to, find out how one can study peace, I guess, or be involved in peace movements without getting too academic about it. I remember my very last test at college. I remember thinking, I am never going back to school after that, because it was kind of boring. But then I got this opportunity to do a peace project. So this fellowship is all centered around a peace project in Africa. And through some work I'd done with interfaith organizations, Monks Without Borders, trying to create a museum of world religions in Los Angeles, working with a group of interfaith people from different religions, mostly Unitarians in Pakistan, which led me to a trip to Pakistan in 2015. working with the World Peace Embassy in Cameroon a long time ago, and then also learning from and helping my mom teach conflict transformation to a group of Nigerian clergy led me to go to this center. And there's a different Rotary Peace Center on each continent, essentially. They're trying to do a new one in South America to have it be on each continent. This is the first one that opened up in Africa. So I got this opportunity, and I thought, this sounds really neat. So I went for 2 months to study with 15 Africans and 2 Europeans and 3 Americans to study peace and conflict, sort of from an African perspective. And this idea that I have for my project was to create a database of personal peace practices. It's called an African Peacemaking Database. And the idea was we have a lot of information about conflict in the world. A lot of the studies that we have go centered around how we can measure and analyze and observe and categorize conflicts in the world. But we don't have a ton of research or application of theory into practice of how peace is present in our lives. And a lot of the analysis that we get of conflict takes place on kind of an institutional level. There's all these amazing databases that sort of inspired my work. There's one called the Global Peace Index that ranks how peaceful countries are. It actually really measures how violent countries are. It's kind of a backwards ranking. Finland, number 1. New Zealand, number 2. The United States is like 120. Pretty bad because we fight a lot of wars. We drop a lot of bombs in wars that was sort of proxy abroad. We have a ton of people in prison. And we have a really high military budget. And income inequality is a really big issue here. So got some work to do in this country. So another index that's really interesting is the World Happiness Index. Measures how happy people are, just from an analysis of happiness. There's another one that talks about how developed nations are economically, how strong the institutions are. There's the Human Development Fund that talks about how equal the sexes are and how much access there is to education among both genders in different countries. So all these studies, they focus on the institutions and the governments and not actually the people. So if you read any of these databases and you're like, man, peace index, cool, I want to learn more about peace in my life, I could sure use more peace in my life. And you see that there's information about your country's, literacy access or, types of people who have access to the internet or military conscription or things like that. It's really hard to make that jump from the institutions and the governments of your country to your own personal application of peace. So I started talking to a lot of people about it, and they said that one of the other issues with these is that essentially it takes a very narrow view of what knowledge is and tries to transport that knowledge onto everybody else. Because in these forms of research, we have Western knowledge, is what we'd call it, being used to do the research. And by Western knowledge, we mean knowledge that's focused on science, on analytics, on measurement, on something that finds things that are really observable in the world and fixed and strong, and you can identify individual parts, individual parts, and see them as separate from yourself. So the research focused from that viewpoint. And when you take the forms of information that you get that forms the databases, they're all based in Europe, essentially. So you have these research institutions doing research on different countries all over the world that are all in London and in North Carolina and in Finland and in The Hague. So again, you have these places that are doing research that is really important for how the entire world views peace, but they're in a very, very small part of the world. So that paradigm, we call it sort of the liberal peace paradigm, the Western paradigm, shows that there's this one approach, and we take these one people that are observing how peace exists, and they think that there is a way to make it universal. if you go to the local level of peace, you find that peace for different people is very personal and is very different. It's multidimensional. It has all these different aspects of what peace is like for us. And it takes a local element, we call it local pieces. There's many local pieces for us to really be aware of what peace is like in our lives. So I spent this last year traveling around different parts of Africa, just seeing if it was possible to make a local approach to a peacemaking database where we go to the people and we don't try and teach them anything. We just listen and learn and have them share what peace has been like in their culture. So I went to Ethiopia, and I went to Somalia, and I went to Malawi after studying in Uganda, and I tried to design this research to see if it was possible. And I found that it was possible. But the way to do it is through a mentor of mine. Who doesn't know she's a mentor of mine? She's kind of the most famous African woman for designing what we call an indigenous methodology, or a local-based method of doing research, where instead of the institutions being in charge of how we get people to share and how we get people to provide us information, and then we take that information, we go somewhere else, and we analyze it, we actually have all of the information, all of the content, and all of the feedback and the follow-up be done by the local people themselves. So there's no separation between the people doing the research and the people providing the content of the research. Actually, the researched are co-researchers, and the people doing the research are the learners. They're learning about what these traditions have to teach. So this is what we call a local approach to doing research. So I spent my time doing this local approach. Now, one thing I found out there is that peace is very, when you have a traditional community, often I was in traditional communities, peace is very ingrained in all of the rituals that they're involved with. So for me, if I'm out here going about my day, I think about peace sometimes, and then other times I'm just going about my day. I'm not thinking about peace. But if you have a culture where you sing songs while you're doing farming that talk about peace, you have dances for relationship dances that are maybe marriage-based or family-based or communication-based that think about peace in the form of the dance itself. You have stories and proverbs and linguistic elements in the language itself that you're speaking that have a peaceful element. Then there's peace in everything you do because it's ingrained in the fabric of your culture. And that is really, really valuable because then it's not separate from your life. So a lot of the peace practices that I found was the same things people were doing every day. It was farming. It was finding work, having access to loans and finding work was one of the biggest forms of peace that people could provide out there that people stated. Singing and dancing, doing your rituals, listening to your elders. I have actually my first sheet because someone said when I gave this talk a long time ago, I want to know what the peacemaking practices are that you found. So I'll pass this out and it sort of shows the pie chart of different types of peace that I have, and I'll kind of do the order of peace that I found out there. Number one was making sure you have a job to do work. That was number one for people out there. Number two was being in touch with your traditions. Number three was having access to food and sharing your food with other people. Number four was singing and dancing and doing drama. Number five was love. And love was expressed defined as a form of oneness, and this oneness was expressed as community solidarity. The other thing I really appreciated about this woman from Botswana who helped mentor me on this process that we would do was think about the type of knowledge that she wanted to be made public that was not necessarily Western. Where Western, we emphasize the individual journey. We might say, I'm lost. I need to go find myself. I need to take a break. I need a vacation. It's self-oriented, and I'm a product of this because I wasn't quite sure what I was doing with myself a decade ago, and I moved out here without knowing anybody, and it's the greatest decision I ever made. And I think that's the case for a lot of people out here. On the other hand, there comes a point where that individual journey, I think, kind of hits a block, and it's maybe not enough, because we do exist in relationship with each other. And so something I really appreciated about the philosophies that I heard out there was that our identity is entirely relational. So if I'm sick, it's not because there's a part of my body that is ill, that needs to be fixed, separated from myself, given some healing, and then I'm okay. No, it's because my relationships are off. There's something wrong in my relationships. And this involves the peace is multidimensional approach. Because it could be a relationship within ourselves, the way we view ourselves, that's not particularly healthy. It could be a relationship with our family member. It could be, this is getting really cool, by the way. Or it could be anything that involves an identity of us being in relationship with other people. So in this sense, I call this a database because I wanted it to have some sway with existing databases where we get forms of knowledge. But the form of knowledge that I wanted to get from these practices, which we then share, by saying these out loud, we nourish, I think, our own community, realizing we should value this form of peace that's here. We also share it, other ideas, with people who want some peace in their life, but maybe they don't know what it is, they don't know how to practice it. So there's value in knowing that this stuff is not for facts, but it's actually for understanding and for healing. The purpose of this is not to get anywhere, it's not to fix anything, it's just to build relationships and to heal. I like that approach too. I think that's really healthy, and I think that form of knowledge, where we think of knowledge, we think of a culture, a form of knowledge that's there to heal and not to gain information, is a really healthy way. To quote this woman, Dr. Bagale, she said, Western knowledge, which used to be and is indigenous knowledge too, it's just indigenous to a specific part of the world and is now spread everywhere, has kind of, its time has sort of come, and it has taught us what we've needed to be taught. But it's time for other knowledge to come in, because it's a little worn out now. And there's lots of other ways of thinking. And maybe some people here feel like when you went to school and you were taught, science and math, and you're like, man, this doesn't really feed me. For some people it really did feed, other people it didn't feed. And you thought, I think differently, and I wish that the form of thinking that I have, or the form of reality that I see, was really cultivated by my educational system or by my culture. So I think when you go to different knowledge systems throughout the world, and I like starting with Africa because on a development level, Africa's pretty weak, America's really strong, our institutions are really awesome, and I'm thankful for that. And so we can show people what strong institutions look like. But our form of community cohesion and the rituals we have for going through our lives and nurturing people as they age, and making sure those connections between elder and youth stay strong. For example, every year we want to have the youth, the young and the old, come together. So the new ideas and the old ideas are nourished and passed on. And I don't think we really have that here. But in many places in Africa, that is super strong, and those rituals are strong. And that understanding of community power without having a lot of money is something that can be taught to other people. So that's another thing that I learned out there. I'm going to take a quick breather, and this is rad. Let's look at these words for a second. Do we see any themes? Or does anybody want to share why they said what they said? What the word is that came to them? I said joy, which looks like I got some love from other people. Did these words, did they come to you really quickly? Is it something that is sort of like always a go-to? Or do you find that you were sort of surprised by what came out? Yes.
I wrote stillness because you can't get it in if you don't sit still and wait a little bit.
Anybody else? Hi.
I wrote let go of ego, and I felt like if you do let go of that, you reduce your defenses, and if you're in conversations and engaging and you reduce your defensiveness, then you're at more peace.
Steven.
I wrote space not in terms of personal space, but giving space for people to change, to move, to be who they are.
I like that a lot. And actually, we had this cool ritual over the weekend where people were going through sort of the zones of healing and burdens that they take upon, and then negative thought patterns, and then going back to claiming your own truth, so to speak. And a lot of these rituals that I found in Ethiopia right now, we're working, and I'll get into sort of the process of the form of the database that I took for designing it in a little bit. But something I found that was really valuable was having a public space where people you trust and who love you can listen as a vulnerability comes out. Maybe there's a conflict, and the conflict needs to be solved between you and someone else. But it's not just you and the one person, because I think we know that when there's an issue, it's actually a lot of people are involved in the issue. And so the whole community would come out often. I'd say 80% of the time would be under a tree, and there were so many workshops that I did under their special tree, so that people could pay witness to the issue that would happen, and then really healing would happen, knowing that it's been shared by everybody. I don't know if you meant that, but I like that. One cool peace practice that I was told by a chief in Malawi was to plant trees. Another idea of local knowledge, we'd say, is that it's knowledge based off of the place that you live, and the generations who have lived in your place, assuming you haven't moved, share that knowledge with you and pass it on. So there is an understanding of the living and the non-living. And maybe we don't talk about the non-living so much. Ancestors, spirits, things like that. And I bet there's some people here who that reality of the non-living is part of their life, because it is for people that I know. So the peace practice they shared was to make sure you plant trees, because trees are the gateway for the non-living to have relationships with you in your life here. And to gain wisdom, you have to be in touch with the non-living, whatever that means. So to do that, plant trees. So plant trees. Try talking to non-living. That was
succession and legacy.
There you go. Mm-hmm. Anybody else want to share anything here? Yeah.
I said drop of water, and the idea was that all of these words kind of start very small and then move out in ever-expanding circles.
Mm-hmm. The ripple effect.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nature. 2 cats on lap. That's awesome. Cats, dogs, nature, comedy. Yeah, it's a lot of nature. Cool. Which is no surprise, I guess. Anybody else have anything they notice?
I said group meditation because I was with 80 people in Thich Nhat Hanh in the Rocky Mountains, and it was just total stillness, and it was a silent experience, and felt safety and wonder and joy and all these emotions all at the same time.
Anybody else want to say anything? Yeah.
I put health, and I was thinking of health for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a pretty important experience here in the Malawi Valley that we have such, I think, marvelous access to health here. But I'm not peaceful about it until everyone's healthy.
Anybody else have anything they want to share? So this is not too different, a little different from the things that I found in these workshops that I do. What we would do, this is sort of stage 1. We triangulated to get the data. We do 3 different things, and they'd all be involved in what creates peace in these different cultures, country by country. One would be these peace images. We get images of peace. And I met a Rastafarian on the beach of Malawi who painted me a baobab tree. Anybody know the baobab tree? Talk about a spiritual tree. If you're not sure what it is, but you have seen the movie Fern Gully, the sacred tree in Fern Gully is the baobab tree. super, super, super huge trunk, and kind of tiny little branches, kind of like T-Rex arms almost. And they're just sort of out of nowhere. They're not in groves. You see this trunk that is swollen with water, I assume, to survive the dry seasons. That's not very tall, like shorter than the height from here to the top of the building, certainly. So it could be 50 feet, something like that. And that was one of the images that I got, and people kept talking about trees so much when I was out there, and the significance of making sure you're in touch with the trees there, that I met this Rasta guy, and he was like, I'll paint you a tree. I'll paint and he was the only full-time artist that I met when I was out there. And I thought, that's awesome, but I just spent a bunch of money on art, and I was kind of over budget. So I was like, I can't do this because I can't pay you. But he was the one person out there who said, well, you got more than money, right? I was like, oh yeah, I got other stuff, yeah. He's like, okay, we'll see what you got. So I ended up trading him for this beautiful baobab painting that's in my room, and another painting of some musicians, 2 pairs of socks, and a rain jacket, and a USB cable, and 2 collared shirts, and 1 CD. And I thought, this is awesome. Like, thank you, Rasta man. Yeah, so I got this idea from it, and I thought it would be really neat if we could actually see representations of what we see in the peace images. That's part 1. Part 2, if this was a multi-day workshop, the first day we went and visited you, I would just want to know what you wanted to share to a newcomer, assuming I'm not from here. Or maybe I'm from Oregon, but I'm not from Malawi County. I would just want to know what you want to share when someone comes to your area and you want to welcome them. So who knows, maybe there'd be an art exhibit here. Maybe we'd do something at Fish Trap. Maybe we'd go do canoeing in the lake. Think about, I guess, what you share with new people who come visit and what you think it's important for them to experience out here, to feel welcome. So in these particular instances, it was often just dancing and singing in the first day. They just dance and sing. And they'd want me to go out in public and tell them what I saw, like the themes I saw from as these 100 of people, were just around, which was interesting. Speaking practice, I guess. And then day 2, you realize that particularly when you're in communities where serious harm has been done through hundreds of years of colonization, where slavery has happened, where your cultural system has been uprooted by a new system that's been forced upon you, where imperialization has happened, not just in your systems of study and government and how your judges work, how your organizations are supposed to be structured, how your businesses are supposed to be worked, how democracy is supposed to be worked. The idea that you have to have a democracy instead of follow your chiefs can be difficult for people, but also in the way that they think. They've been taught that they can't think the way they traditionally think in a lot of ways. Also, their local languages have been decimated in some areas too. So when that happens, you really have to be aware that when you talk about peace, conflict is going to come out. You can't just expect people who are very you think are wise to just be like, hey, tell me how peace works. You have to be aware that there's some harm involved. There's maybe some trauma, community trauma, and it's important for them to be able to voice what's been difficult in their lives. And anybody who's been through a really difficult time, who's then maybe viewed as wise by someone else and wants advice about something, you might be able to give it. But at the same time, this pain is still within you, and it's important to be able to voice that pain. So we take time to talk about conflict, while also mentioning that community power, which is present in these areas, even if poverty is really rampant everywhere you go, is a great strength in making sure that gets nourished. And then in day 3, we start the images. We get the images from people. And then from the images, we make little categories, little ideas of the different spheres of peace. Peace as a multidimensional approach. Peace is not just one thing. Peace as many pieces that exist in our life, and each one needs to be watered for us to feel good. So here we maybe say, definitely nature. There's some spirituality there too. And then from these different time to ourself, there's a lot of, I think, time to ourself. which is a great gift. When I'd go out there, I'd be around people all the time, which is kind of awesome. I took one trip for 2 months to Uganda, then one trip for 3 months to Somalia and Ethiopia and Malawi, and then I did another month and a couple weeks to Kenya and Uganda to present and try to keep the database going with some of these African Union contacts I've made to keep it going in other countries. And when I come back here and I go on my walk, I'm like, oh my God, thank God. It's nice to have all this space that we have. So from the spheres of peace, we ask people to share their practices for how they exercise and practice and do peace in their lives. And that's kind of the bread and butter of the database for sharing with other people, is you get these beautiful practices of something that isn't separate from your life. It could be playing sports, it could be going to church, it could be praying, it could be a lot of balance between making sure you have time alone and making sure you have time with other people. And often we would separate the groups among the youth and among the women and among the elders, and they would all share their different dynamics of peace. And sometimes when they'd view the absence of peace, the youth would talk about needing work and not having work because getting access to jobs in a lot of these areas is so tough. And they'd say, if we can find some work, we could find peace. And the women would say, if we can have our families be strong, our men be smart and love us and love in return. One of the dances I saw was a gratitude dance to their husbands. But first, they said, you have to listen to me. And they danced this idea of you having to listen to me. And then they did this. Because the men agreed in the dance they would listen, and they said, thank you, I love you, you are amazing, you listened to me. I honor you for listening to me. That was the dance. So it was a gratitude dance for being listened to. So our families have to be strong, we have to be listened to. And then the elders would come on and they'd say, for there to be peace, love needs to be abundant, and right now we have a lack of love. So those are the three things often I would find. The youth want to go do stuff. The women they run the whole show, really. They keep the family strong, they keep the community strong, they're the backbone. And then the elders, from their long time distance perspective, talking about the values that we need to make sure we have, and also mourning the loss of passing on these values to young people who no longer trust the system. So instead of going to the traditional way of solving conflict as a group, it goes to the court system, which is from a system they've inherited recently that doesn't feel organic to themselves, and problems have developed from that.
Seth, you didn't say men, so you said children, women, and elders.
Well, the youth would be women and men, well, boys and girls, actually women and men, because youth in Africa is 18 to 35.
Oh.
It's a little different. The women groups, and then the elders are almost always, but not completely men. Yeah. In Somalia, totally male-based, totally. In Ethiopia, mostly male-based. It's quite patriarchal there, although Ethiopia has probably 100 different languages. Each language is basically its own culture, so you can't really combine it into one, which is beautiful, but also leads to a ton of problems there. Malawi is about 15 cultures. We did mapping with 6 of them, peace mapping, so we're doing now with 6 of them. And in the southern half of Malawi, the groups that choose the chiefs, which are very, very important, don't underestimate the importance of the chiefs, is entirely by women of the leading clan. The women will choose the chiefs. They generally choose men, but not always. I got to meet one woman chief. And when you become a chief, you lose your name. And now you are, well, in this case, chief. If it was this village, it would be Chief Joseph. You'd be chief of your town. And you would have someone above you that would be the chief of a very small region, like Enterprise Joseph and Naha. And then you'd have someone above you called the Traditional Authority. Their name would be Traditional Authority, Walawa, example. No more name. Their name's gone. Traditional Authority, Walawa. And then you would have the person who oversees kind of the whole region of, say, Eastern Oregon. And then you have the paramount chief, who is the leader of your entire culture. And I didn't get to meet any of those people, but apparently they were close. So
Seth?
Yeah.
So in many of the places that you visited, there were right under the surface tensions and conflicts with people of a different
Overland.
ethnicity, a different language, a different. Did
Yeah.
that bubble up? Can you? I mean, say in Malawi County here, you could say that we have right under there's conflict about wolves, about timber, about whatever. You could name the things that we would find conflict. Did they bubble up? Did those conflicts bubble up?
Absolutely, yeah. And in some instances, there were killings. Overland happens in many places. Yeah, it's land based. You can think that it's religious based, but you meet people from these cultures that are part of different religions. In fact, it used to be very common for people from different, essentially, the faiths that I found was predominantly Muslim and Christian, and then some subsets of traditional religions, animist religions, and Rastafarians. And it used to be really easy to intermarry. It wasn't really a big deal. You could switch religions. It wasn't really a big deal. Now it's a bigger deal. And one other part of the peace mapping process is on day one with the youth, we would always encourage them to put on a play. You can say you put on whatever, because they love drama out there. They love drama. You can put on a play, and by day 3, you have to perform to everybody whatever it is that you've worked on over the last 3 days. And I'd go and I'd ask them, how can I help? And they'd always be like, we got it, get out of here, And then they would just put on these amazing performances, pretty much entirely improv. I was wondering if they'd have a script. They just, And they were rock solid. The first one that they put on, this is in northern Malawi on the Bay, was a play about how you have to convince your parents that it's okay for one of your siblings to marry someone from a different religion. It's not too bad. Another play was on government corruption, which is a big issue there, because people aren't paid enough, so it's sort of considered part of the deal. If you go and need a help from a cop out here, you got to pay him a little bit of money. If you need a visa, you also give him a little bit of money. It's expected because salaries are low, but it does lead to issues too. So their play involved making sure corruption is not so active there. So I'm going to go back to just this quickly thing to sort of span the work that I did. You start with these images that we get. Then you go to the practices that we have. Be interested to see what practices we all do in our lives to feel peace. And that's just the daily part of it, getting peace on a daily level. But when you are in these communities where peace has been passed on through the centuries, in your rituals, and we have a new world coming out where we're somewhat global. We're talking to people from the city, and the rural areas are coming together. So we make sure to connect the youth and their new ideas and the elders, and then they spend the next 2 months talking about peace in their culture, in their music, in their dance, in their linguistics, or whatever it is. And then they write a research paper, and that's sort of the final leg, the 3 branches of this. So that was sort of what I did, and I've connected with the inter-religious branch of the United Nations. It's called the United Religions Initiative, to hook me up with local communities to do this work. There's about 20 people now sort of working on this project, I would say, with me co-leading it with another guy from Malawi. I've worked with the African Union on integrating it into something called early warning, where we figure out how, when violence is about to happen, is there a way we can implement what we call positive peace practices so that the violence can be stopped, not just the act itself of the violence that's about to emerge, this particular pocket of violence, but the people themselves feel like there's some active harmony being reinstilled to rebalance things that are out of balance. I'm also talking with International Peace Institute, these other sort of big peace institutes, to figure out a way to, ultimately, you have to get this stuff into policy, into national policy, for it to have a really big effect. So figuring out how we can make these feedback loops be strong enough that governments are encouraged to teach this stuff in schools or to do workshops with the people so that they ask them to share their practices and to make sure that this positive peace stuff is really nourished. So we're not spending so much time just fighting against conflict that exists, but actually bringing people up on the assumption that peace is kind of a norm in us and violence is the exception. And if you encourage people's cultures that have peace in them, the violence will go away. I'm going to read just a couple brief things here that I really like from some of what I've learned. And one thing about this approach is that we like taking a strength-based approach to solving conflict and figuring out peace, but where we focus on the strengths of a community. And this woman she's in New Zealand. She's a Maori woman. She says, the fatal impact of the West on indigenous societies has been theorized as this idea. It's 5 stages. 1 is discovery and contact. 2 is population decline. 3 is acculturation. 4 is assimilation. And 5 is reinvention as a hybrid ethnic culture where there's problems and you have to figure it out and make yourself anew. Where from the local approach of people who have been harmed by some of these practices, they articulate it as there's contact and invasion, 1. 2, genocide and destruction. 3, resistance and survival. 4, recovery as indigenous peoples. And 5, a sense of hope and optimism grows, where we know we've had a tremendous challenge and we've made it through. So I like that lens where it's sort of a journey that we go through and we make it through, rather than being looked at as victims. In any community, you can do that same approach. So sometimes when we look at deficits and study deficits, we actually give identity and give strength to the deficit as a thing that comes out. And the opposite happens when you look at the strengths, even if you feel like, oh, there's more problems than there are positives right now. But if you look at the positives, they can kind of go up to the surface. I'm going to pass this around. This is the Worlds of Peacemaking that I found in Malawi. You can just read it for a second. I think I'm going to end just by playing a little bit of music, but before I go that,
I'll ask you if you encountered any U.S. Peace Corps workers and reacted with them, or had, made any connection.
I met very few Americans just because of COVID. Yeah, and the places that Ethiopia and Somalia, there's just like nobody from the West there because of violence going on. I had some great hosts who kept me safe and made sure I was in safe places, so I felt safe at all times. But in Somalia, I basically couldn't leave the hotel the whole time I was there. In Ethiopia, there's this war going on in the north between Tigray and Eritrea and the Ethiopian government, so I could go to the border and met some people who had escaped the war, but couldn't go into those areas, and because of that, Americans aren't encouraged to go.
Pretty much the U.S. Peace Corps stays out of warring.
Yeah.
They were all sent home with COVID while Seth was there.
And I went to these places not to make a statement, but to follow the theory that places that are considered the most violent in the world, is there peace present there? And it was peace present there. When you go to just go to people's local environments where they live, you find people find a way to get by, and their practices are strong, and they want to share it with other people, and they're very proud of their culture. Yeah.
Was language ever a barrier to community?
Yeah, big barrier. I try to have 2 guides in every session that I would have. In Uganda and Malawi, English is a national language, as British colonies. Ethiopia was never colonized. They're very proud of that. The Italians tried and failed. In fact, I was there on the day of the Italian defeat celebration. All of the streets were closed, and everybody went out and it was a big party. So I would have these guides as a way to feel like I wasn't just making sure that I was invited before I went first. And then secondly, having someone who spoke the local language and someone who spoke the national language. Some people only, so like in Ethiopia, it's Amharic is the national language, but some people only speak Gamo. They might speak some Amharic, but not a lot. Some people speak a little English. Everywhere is a little English, but not a lot. So it was always helpful for me to have 2 ins nationally to make me feel welcome and to help translate if necessary. Yeah.
When you started this off, you asked individuals how peace was part of their life. But the other part of peace, and the one I guess I think of first, is absence of conflict. And so I'm not clear about the relationship between an individual's perception of peace and how that impacts in lack of conflict.
It's a really good question. If anybody who's been in a really intense personal conflict or has actually lived through a war or a conflict has had the experience that when the conflict is over, there's no peace yet. It takes a long time for peace to come. For you to actually feel harmony, for you to feel safe, and for you to feel like you can really express yourself freely. So this positive peace element that I'd say goes one step further beyond the absence of conflict, towards the presence of something very vibrant, very energized, very real, something that really feeds us. So when we think of peace as the absence of conflict, what is there? Are we there at the place we really want to be yet? Or is it just the bad stuff is really over? They say that when bloodshed has finally begun, the first bloodshed has begun, violence didn't start there. Violence started with the first word. Or you could even go earlier. Violence can be the first thought, the thought of someone is different from ourselves, that it was okay to harm. So I like thinking of peace personally as something when the violence is over, in whatever form that can take, in family or in an actual war, you still have a ton of work left before there really is peace in an area. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's what I think of when I think of kind of going beyond the definition of absence of conflict.
I guess I can just imagine lots of cultures that they seem like they are internally peaceful, but they're always waging war.
Peace
against
comes on
people
many.
they just don't like. I mean, just for all kinds of reasons, but their own cultures, I could imagine, are as long as they're within one another in their own group, they feel peaceful, but they still start wars.
I think that's a situation where when you get into the dynamic of actually being with the people, it's a little different than us viewing it, because it's easy to view and see, we read about a conflict, there's a conflict there. But if you go with the people, maybe it's more complex than that.
Why is one frat house just like another?
So, I think, Seth, that oftentimes that people of different religions, and you mentioned that earlier, or different ethnicities, get along just fine most of the time. And then something happens. Usually something external happens, a change of leadership or something. I lived in a Turkish Kurdish area, and I had friends that were Turks and Kurds, and we ate together and worked together, and we were together all the time and kidded each other and whatnot. A few years later, people light sparks from a national level that says, the Kurds are bad, and anyway, and then that national outside influence filters down to the local, and as I think somebody in Sarajevo said, when conflict starts, the thugs take over, and it's either my thugs or your thugs, and you have to pick a side. And that analogy has always made sense to me, that we get along. We get along in this community most of the time, with people who are quite different from us politically or religiously or whatever. But we human beings have a bad habit of being susceptible to these sparks that set us off. I don't know how that fits into the whole peacemaking process. How do you stop that from happening?
Well, I think you're right about when there's a vacuum that comes in, gets taken over by people who love power, and then you're in kind of a desperate situation. Yeah. And then your culture might be defined by these people who take power and like starting wars, because there's a lot of profit in wars. There's a lot of self-interest in wars. Yeah. But it doesn't necessarily speak to the people who are puppets to the wars being fought. Often, when a war is being fought or there's big conflict, mothers are sad because their sons are gone, and women are assaulted. The actual people who are part of the war, who have to go through it, know how terrible it is. So I think you'd find that they, if had the opportunity or the voice, will speak out against it. It's not necessarily the whole culture, loves to fight and wants to.
Did you visit any of the, like the Rwanda, the reconciliation programs
Sure.
there?
Yeah. Yeah.
How does that work?
The Gachaca courts? Yeah. I mean, they're complex. They figured out a way in a couple instances in countries where genocide happened to institutionalize traditional forms of solving conflict. So it wasn't just the normal court system. It was elders listening and making sure there was some relationship restoration that happened in the process of punishing people. It wasn't just punitive. And you had some leniency depending on how much ownership the people who caused the violence, say you killed someone and you admitted to it and you apologized and you seemed remorseful of it and you talked about it, your punishment was a little bit more dependent on that. Your ability to engage with the people who you harmed. That's one vote against the death penalty, is because if you kill someone who killed your family, you give yourself up the opportunity to maybe one day forgive them. Maybe one day you have the opportunity to forgive them if you feel it. It's up to you though, if you feel it. So in these instances, particularly in Rwanda, a little bit in Sierra Leone and in South Africa, they had these commissions come together where you could figure out a way to really bring the society back together that had gone so wrong in so many ways. And it kind of worked in both instances, but there are also big problems because in some instances too much leniency shows that some people don't feel respected to see there are people who killed their family still out on the street. In other instances, the community was so harmed by violence. In Rwanda, hundreds of thousands of people killed, brothers killing brothers in 1 or 2 months. The form of the government that came after that was really harsh and strong and didn't leave a whole lot of room for freedom of expression after that. So it's a multi-decade process to get over something like that. But I do like the form these courts have taken on the whole. Before I end with some music and we focus just a little bit on these beautiful paintings, any other questions that anybody has about anything peace related?
How do you build peace in a place that thinks it's peaceful? A lot of the comments I've heard have been on a national level of one violent group dislikes another violent group. A lot of the comments I've heard have been on a national level of one nation warring on another nation. And yes, the United States does a lot of wars on other nations, but those are a long ways away from the Wallowa Valley.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you've got a family member in it, it can be a long ways away from you. Talk about ethnic difficulties. Those are, those can feel awfully separated from us. We can say, hey, we've got a pretty united political group, we get along. Yet, I still think that if there's value in peacemaking, there's value everywhere. How do you make peace in places that think they're peaceful?
Anybody have any ideas?
Dessert potluck.
I think you start by bringing people together, and we've got people together here. This is a start. But there's also a lot of people who aren't here. And so you make sure the people who aren't here, however best you can, are welcome to come and say they're part of what peace is like in their lives. So it's bringing together people in a place that's safe to share, to do a lot of sharing, and make sure it goes on for a really long time so that things don't get left out or left behind. And maybe in the process there's some specific rituals, you can bring in where you're in a circle or you're singing or you maybe make there's oath rituals that happen where you kind of make a promise to one another to do things. But on the other hand, because in this instance, we haven't been in this land, most of us here probably, for hundreds or thousands of years. So this is a new place for us. So maybe there's also some new rituals, some new activities that we could make up that bring people together. And we've had some here in the past.
Go jump in the lake.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what that means.
So, Seth, I think that in my 50 years here,
yeah,
what I see is the revival of Nez Perce culture and Nez Perce involvement in our community, as I see the rest of us hitchhiking on them as a peacemaking activity. And you can see it most maybe in the town of Wallowa, where Wallowa was always the low end economically of the county. It was the low income housing. It was where the mill folded, where all the stuff happened. But if you go down and watch the people of Wallowa get behind the powwow and come out and help down there, there's just a tremendous reconciliation that's going on there. And now you have Wallowa Resources, and you have the land trusts, and you have root gathering, and you have all of these activities that are gradually sucking in more and more of us.
Yeah, there's already people here who have rituals related to the land that we live on.
Right.
So learning those would be a pretty good start too.
Yeah.
Because I'd love to learn those rituals. I don't have them.
It strikes me that part of what you have to do, if you're gonna do peacemaking in a place that feels peaceful, is go deep enough to find places where peace no longer does not exist. So on the surface, things are often peaceful. Underneath there may be currents. There's turbulence underneath the smooth surface. And I think sometimes when we just simply kind of bounce off each other, don't really talk, don't really go deep, we don't know where the differences are and what the conflicts are.
Thank you for that. And what I found too can be the opposite too. Where we look at a place and we just think it's full of violence because they don't have a lot of money, and there's wars, but if you go talk to them, there's strength too. Okay. I think in both instances it does go both ways.
Seth, it sounds like, and this is interesting, that traditions and rituals hold a community together, hold a culture together, and are very important to peace. And yet it seems like in this country, we are really losing those. I mean, people have stopped having funerals, for example, as an automatic. And you're saying that's also happening in the countries that you visited, and it's a concern of their elders.
A little bit, yeah. It's happening a little bit. It's kind of the way you go when you go towards urban life and individualist life, which has its advantages because, you don't want to over-romanticize other cultures because there's been, women haven't been listened to in a lot of places in Africa. And a lot of our freedoms that we have would be great for people to have there, but it should be on their terms. And we don't really know what other people want, even though we think we might. So I think finding a balance between sort of our individual journeys where people are free to go explore is really healthy. On the other hand, having a community to come back to that will always welcome you and needs your gifts. Your gifts need to be shared with everybody else. That's kind of the root of the journey, in my opinion. Makes for a very healthy space. So I think a lot of people I know, for example, in this country have great gifts. Do they have a community, like a really strong community that they can come back to share those gifts with, that they know will always welcome them back in open arms? I'm not sure, So I like thinking that in a strong community, your individuality is actually super important because you offer something really crucial to the community that they might not have elsewhere. And your gift that you have, whatever you're good at, the way you think, maybe your talent, is there to be a pillar for one part of the community too. It's form of expression. It needs a form of expression. And the community offers it a form of expression. And ritual offers people an opportunity to grow and to heal and to feel like they're being seen by other people. So I'm kind of moving into more of a relational-minded view of my own identity, I think, out here. Was one impact of this trip that I've been taking. Any other thoughts or questions?
May I make it?
Yeah, after. Yeah, Judy?
I look at this and I see our individual things that make us feel peaceful. The one thing that pops out for me is cigarette break. And the reason it does
Cigarette break.
is because for me, it captures something that we're not thinking about, which is how now cigarettes are so terrible. We hate everybody that smokes cigarettes. They pollute us all, and they have to be 10 feet or more away from us. And there's a lot of stuff, which I totally get, because it's bad for us, and secondary smoke is bad for us. But unless we can move towards that, I don't mean accept cigarette smoking, but understand that some people smoke cigarettes. We are going to come to a peaceful place that's bigger, like you said, relational. One time I read a thing about cigarette break that touched me so much that it made me want to cry, and that was going 10 feet outside of an establishment and having a cigarette with another person is like giving someone a flower. And all of a sudden, it just overpowered me. Because I think there's truth in that. Even though most of the things on that board are me. I would rather have mountains, reading. The cigarette break is the thing that is connection. That's what I'm saying. Okay.
Thank you.
I just wanted to follow up on the idea of all of these nature peacefulness things that are our Wallowa County peace, and the idea that we can definitely embrace mushroom hunting as a tradition.
Yeah.
Or I know families will pass on hunting grounds and not share those with anybody, you know. And there's a lot of stuff that's like, oh, you know, I'll only tell you after you've been here a while or whatever. So like, I think those are maybe also traditions that we could recognize as our own that might not be, you know, Turtle Island at large, but like they're us and they're our area and they're our traditions. So might not be church or whatever, but they're not non-existent, I don't think.
Can we have a quick meta moment and ask you what it's like painting peace while we're talking about peace, sort of talking about peace?
I take a little while to process things, so I can probably tell you later.
We're going to have a... Thank you guys for coming. Thank you to the Josephi Center. Thank you to Rich. Thank you to Cheryl. Thank you to the Rotary Club of Wallowa County for sponsoring all the great things they sponsor, for helping me out. It's been a life-changing experience because of that. New music, and I'll end with a little bit of music, and we'll try and just have a little music and painting moment.
Seth, are you going to talk about, you started to say you were going to talk about the art a little bit.
This art?
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk about it yet until I'm going to let it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to let
music
it.
now.
Yeah.
Do we eat and drink now?
You may. Yeah, you guys can get up if you want. Do people want to get up and get something to eat? Okay, get up and get something to eat.
Pardon? Yeah. For those who don't know, there are restrooms in the rear, and there are drinks and food over on that table.
Yes, that's
right over here. Table over there. Yeah. Oh yeah. Go ahead. And I have your bag. You have it.
in the